the kingdom of fame. It's like a race at the top because they wanna be boss. They don't care who they step on as long as they get along. Politicians in my eyes.
All right, we are live once again, Renters Radio. It is the first day since the eviction moratorium has been expired, lifted, and the housing courts are now open. So we have a lot to talk about. We have a special guest, State Senator Jamie Eldridge, in today, calling in from my hometown of Boxborough, Mass., representing Middlesex and Worcester District, who has dropped a few new bills on the housing issue as well as universal basic income. So we're going to get right to it. I'm also here with my co-host, Evan George, as always.
Hello, hello.
And our fearless producer, Herb Morsiglio. He made the news this weekend on ESPN, setting up Fenway.
ESPN, Fox, CNN, made the rounds.
Herb is more famous than all of us. Shout out to Herb. So let's get the phone line up. We got State Senator Jamie Eldridge on the line. Can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, Lauren. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. We tried to have you a couple weeks ago, but there was COVID concerns, so we're happy to be back. This is kind of a
Absolutely
strange time. So it was funny. We were actually doing a show with State Rep Mike Connolly a couple weeks ago, and you announced this new bill in the Senate, the Hero Coalition, to provide $300 million in new revenue for climate resiliency and affordable housing. We have been pushing the COVID-19 Housing Stability Act for the past, summer, month, during all this time. How does this tie into that? And what is the, just talk a little bit about what this bill is that you've been pushing with Nika Elguardo.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the HERO bill, which would raise around $300 million in new revenue, half going to environmental resiliency or combating climate change and half to affordable housing, I think would complement the Housing Stability Act. And I want to be, absolutely clear. We need to pass the Housing Stability Act. I'm incredibly frustrated that the legislature did not take action before the eviction moratorium expired this weekend. And I'm hoping, we can still pass legislation, even though, today the housing court, began to open to consider older eviction cases from before the bill became law. But yeah, this bill, which is really, I think, an example of coalition building, is you have the housing justice, social justice organizations come together with the climate justice groups to create a new revenue source that would go to both of these purposes. And in terms of your question directly about how this could complement the Housing Stability Act, a key piece of the Housing Stability Act is actually providing money to small property owners to pay their rent, or to provide a tax credit if they agree not to evict their tenants. And at a time when we've lost approximately $5 billion in revenue, we need to find revenue sources, but also make sure that revenue is progressive. And so the revenue source here is a doubling of the deeds excise fee or deeds excise tax per $1,000 of value of a house. So obviously, if someone is selling $1 million house, there's going to be more revenue from that, and therefore, I think it's a fairly progressive approach. And that approximately $150 million right now on the housing side would go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which builds affordable housing, and the Housing Preservation and Stabilization Fund, which could be MRVP, which is the state Section 8 vouchers. It could be, rental assistance. And since Representative Illigardo and I filed the bill, we have gotten a push to say, well, what if some of that money was going to be dedicated to raft or other forms of rental assistance, since you're going to see, some actions by landlords to evict tenants. So, can we provide immediate infusion of money, assuming this bill becomes law, into rental assistance, so that a landlord, doesn't initiate a notice to quit or an act to evict the tenant.
So
So that's what the bill does. Yeah, I can go into more detail, but that's the specific, the sort of the basics of the bill and how it relates to the Housing Stability Act.
yeah, so I mean, this bill has been. It seems like how this bill was being worked on for a while because we had a guest on our show about a year ago that was, I guess, helping you work on this. Michael Kane from the Mass
Mhm.
Alliance of HUD Tenants.
Yes.
So this has kind of been a longer process. Do you think that this is going to be able to rectify the crisis that we're about to happen in any way, or is this just a funding mechanism?
This specific bill, the HERO coalition bill, which is its Senate docket 3056 and House docket 5275, I really just see it as a supplement to what the legislature should do now and still can do, is to extend the eviction moratorium by legislation, perhaps do some carve outs so it's focused just on tenants that are impacted by COVID, and also provide financial relief to small property owners or landlords. So I see this as being a supplement to that, but part of a bigger discussion, which is a reminder of where we began this session, which was we were going to pass a bold climate change bill. The governor, to his credit, filed a bill around climate resiliency. And we could still pass a solid climate change bill, but I think this speaks to something that I think more and more environmental justice advocates are making the point, is that housing justice, climate justice, it's the same. If
Yes.
you're impacted by flooding, by high asthma rates, by an incinerator being your neighborhood, then that's going to impugn your ability or affect your ability to live in housing if you're having bad health outcomes. And so it's all connected, and so that's why we wanted to bring together these groups, and it's been endorsed by well over 30 organizations, from MACDC to 350 Mass to the Chinese Progressive Association to your point, the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants, to Clean Water Action and the Smart Growth Alliance. So this has been a coalition effort, and I was pleased to file Representative Elagardo, but the advocates that I mentioned and many others, they have been working on this for at least a year.
Yeah, and I do want to point out just one number here, is that the deeds excise fee on home purchases would be increased from $4.56 per $1,000 to $9.12 per $1,000, and that's not even very high.
Exactly, and one of the things when I testify on similar bills around affordable housing to legislative committees is that, look, if I'm middle class, if I'm upper middle class, and say the Acton Boxborough area where we grew up and where I represent now, if a couple has the money, has the financing to buy an $800,000 house, and suddenly he or she or the couple have to pay another $1,000 or $2,000, let's be honest, the bank is going to finance that. That's
Right.
not going to be a burden to that couple. But if you think of the cascading effect of that, the multiplier effect of that, across the state, and our estimate is it would raise around $300 million. That's a dedicated revenue source that could reverse a lot of the cuts that have happened, over the past 20 years to housing vouchers, to rental assistance, to building affordable housing, which we really don't see enough of, especially in the suburbs.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the criticisms of a lot of these bills is where will the money come from?
Yep.
And so I was like, oh, hey, look, here's a solution. But I believe Evan has a question.
Hey, Jamie, Evan George
Yeah.
here. I'm Lauren's trusty co-host. So one of the
Hello.
things that I find very fascinating, especially about you filing this bill, is when we look at like the upcoming problems Massachusetts is anticipating on facing with climate change, it is primarily going to be on the coast. And I'm sure you're familiar. There's something referred to as the trustees report, large group of landowners throughout the coast really just filed this 40-page briefing saying that we need to do something about climate change now because of how much it affects especially coastal properties, whether that's just global sea level rise or also hurricanes. And what I find fascinating is, you are coming from just a little bit east of Worcester, and how susceptible do you think your constituency will be to an increase in property tax where, thinking back, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, a very modest transfer fee tax, or just giving communities the ability to pass a transfer fee tax was absolutely gutted in the State House. And so if you wanted to speak to, do you think that this is something that property owners across Massachusetts are going to get behind, doubling of their tax, or do you see this being a long-term fight to get this bill through?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly my hope is that, given that Senate and House leadership, are looking for possible revenue sources and are recognizing the housing crisis, that we're going to have, that they would see this as a source of revenue. Because, it's certainly likely that property owners or prospective property owners, would oppose this. Usually, it's the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, it's the corporate special interests that still have a lot of influence at the State House that just immediately come out and oppose any tax or fee increase on real estate transactions, even if it's luxury tax or on high cost housing. So with respect to property owners, I think what is an interesting discussion, and I'm hoping will happen in part because we partnered with climate change groups on this, is that, I think that a lot of people in the suburbs, a lot of homeowners are very active on, taking action on climate change.
Right.
The town of Acton at a special town meeting passed a climate emergency resolution. And if you are upfront and talk about the fact that this is a very modest, one-time increase when someone purchases a home, will they be comfortable so long as that money is coming back to the community to combat climate resiliency and to address affordable housing, which I will say, I think more and more people who are active on racial justice and are protesting since the murder of George Floyd are recognizing that, affordable housing and the segregation that's been, built into the system, into our zoning and housing laws, especially in the suburbs, that if we're really serious about Black Lives Matter and racial justice, then we need to build more multifamily or affordable housing in the suburbs and really in every community.
I absolutely agree, and I think the strategy of linking climate change with housing is very spot on, absolutely ties together these larger threats. And while we're normally known as a housing rights show, I'm going to get to dip into some more environmental policy stuff. So just so people can understand really where Massachusetts is at in terms of the threat of climate change, just very briefly, I'm going to read from the Better Future Project, where I think that's a group that you've collaborated with before. Reading from a recent report. During the last century, Boston has sunk 6 to 8 inches, and it will sink another 5 to 6 inches in this century. Consequently, the change in relative sea levels is among the most rapid in the nation, with by 2050, the sea level rise could be another 3 feet in Boston, also along the Cape. And even these projections, the Better Future Project is saying, might not be, these projections are too low. This is not even the worst case scenario. One of my favorite, not favorite, memories when I was speaking against a housing project, environmentalist was there talking about the floodplain, and then he said, of course, it could also rain that day, and then the whole project's gone. So a lot of these projections, again, are pretty low. But my question to you, with that is the threat, that is kind of what Massachusetts is facing. You said that the funding, $150 million, will be directed, and correct me if I'm wrong, to the Global Warming Solutions Trust Fund. So my question is in two parts. One, how does that fund operate? And then two, will $150 million be enough?
Absolutely. So yeah, the Global Warming Solutions Trust Fund is administered by the governor. And an example where I think it's been a pretty successful program by the Baker Fleet administration is these municipal vulnerability preparedness grants, MVP grants, and so they come from that fund. So it's overseen by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and so that money has gone to many communities across Massachusetts, including in my district, to do planning. So you have sort of the more typical climate change activists, but they're sitting down with the fire chief or EMS or public health or the town manager and discussing, well, what are the impacts, since we know climate change is happening, to taking care of seniors, taking care of, low-income families, to addressing, things from flooding to heat waves that, are already happening and are only going to get worse because we haven't taken bold action, even in Massachusetts. So it's under, the executive branch, but it does provide this source of funding that will boost, that fund, and then get into, hopefully not just helping with planning, but actually, infrastructure building, maybe improving public health, other actions that can, really protect our communities from the worst impacts of climate change. $150 million a year is a good chunk of change to dedicate to a program. It's also, not enough. As an example, at the town of Littleton that I represent, they just got a $750,000 MVP grant to protect open space, because if you're talking about reducing climate change, there's a balanced approach towards development and preservation. And if we continue to just develop and cut down too many trees, that's going to contribute to global warming. So this will protect some land in Littleton. But it doesn't go far enough, but I think it's a good start. And I think the fact that it's a dedicated revenue source is really what's key. And, Governor Baker proposed a similar tax just for climate resiliency, but the fact that he proposed it, I think shows that, it's a fairly common sense, idea, and the legislature should take a hard look at it.
So what are the projections for this bill? I've been, reading lately in the Globe that there's not much going on in the State House lately. We had Mike Connolly on 2 weeks ago, and we've been out in the streets protesting for the Housing Stability Act, and no movement there. Apparently, there haven't been many sessions in the State House at all, at least in the House. So, what's the timeline for this at this point?
Yes, and I read some of the Globe stories over the weekend, and I'm certainly very frustrated with what is not happening on Beacon Hill, and really appreciate Representative Mike Connolly's advocacy. Just been in the streets, been very vocal about his bill and the need to take further action. I think what's important to remember is that as frustrating as it is, what the legislature is trying to get agreement on, and I don't know where the logjam is we've got a police reform bill that we really want to be strong. We do have a climate change bill, economic development, transportation bond bill, and a housing bill, on top of a revenue crisis and trying to figure out the budget. And I think, unfortunately, as frustrating as it is, until we get agreement on most or all of those conference committees, you're not going to see other legislation come up. But the hope is that perhaps right after the election, if we're able to pass those bills, then are there other bills that we can take up? And since we do have that deficit, that's where the HERO Coalition bill, I think has a place,
right,
of raising significant revenue and dedicating that to things like rental assistance, which are really needed right now with the end of the eviction moratorium.
And not to make you to answer the same question twice, Jamie, but I'm going to right now just read from the Globe article because it is pretty funny. In the 2.5 months...
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
In the 2.5 months since they voted to expand their calendar amid the pandemic, Massachusetts lawmakers have not held a single formal session or roll call vote. There are major pieces of legislation, just like you outlined, policing, transportation, healthcare, and more, remain locked in secretive, closed-door talks. And on first glance, somebody might say, well, this is because from that end of July until now, people need to be campaigning. This is campaign season. We'll deal with it after the general. And of course, you know what I'm going to lead up to, which is, I believe it's close to 75 to 80% of Massachusetts lawmakers are not even in a contested race whatsoever. And so, not to make you point fingers or anything, but just to try to explain it to the layman, how is it possible that 2.5 months and there hasn't been a single formal session?
Well, part of it is a formal session just means when we're taking a roll call vote on a quote unquote controversial bill. So you think about the police reform bill or
Right.
climate change or say reproductive rights, immigration rights. So we are having sessions to pass non-controversial bills, but again, until we get those conference committees agreed upon, I think there was a sense from the House and Senate leadership that they weren't going to take up any other bills because of how that might impact the conference committee. I certainly never expected that we would do a comprehensive police reform bill. It certainly should have gone further, but I actually think it's quite a strong bill, especially showing my bias on the Senate side. But until we get those done, I just don't think. I think it would have created some imbalance if we had taken up other bills. So it is frustrating. I do want to say that we're all working very hard, mostly on constituent services. Some projects or events in our districts, but most people aren't going to the State House because the State House is closed and following public health guidelines. But everybody is working hard, but there was a decision not to take up any controversial bills until we got these conference committees done, and I'm hoping they will pass soon after the election.
Okay, fair enough. I won't make you belabor it too much. And you brought up the police reform bill, and that is something that has definitely been on everyone's minds from the months and months after the George Floyd killing until right now. And so, can you just give us a brief outline of what are the differences between the Senate and the House police reform bill, and like what is this big debate point that they've been at for over 2.5 months now?
Yeah, and there are differences, although I am pleased that the components of each bill are mostly related. So you didn't have too many things that were outside of the scope of what the House or Senate did. So an example where I think both the House and Senate are on the same page is the post peace officer standards and training legislation that would, for the first time ever, create state licensing of police officers and then training, uniform training. I completely acknowledge there's a lot of skepticism, often backed up by studies, that training of police won't make much of a difference, but I do think it is important in order for us to get to the licensing and therefore the potential delicensing of a police officer if a police officer has been proven to violate someone's civil rights or break the law in mistreating a civilian. So that is I think a key piece of the bill. Use of force. Both the House and Senate have language around use of force. This is an area where I commend the House, is that around the chokehold language is stronger in the House than the Senate. A complete ban on chokeholds in the House, whereas the Senate language still creates an opening for police officers to use a chokehold if that officer feels that his life is at risk. I disagree with what happened on the Senate side, but that was what passed. But use of force, so prohibiting a police officer from shooting at a civilian who is running away or resisting arrest, absolutely key to get that passed. Limitations on tear gas. So those are areas where I think there's a lot of common ground. The provision where there is a fairly big difference, and there's been a lot of focus on this, is the qualified immunity language. The bill that the Senate passed in the broader legislation was a bill that came out of my committee. I chaired the Judiciary Committee that basically would reform the qualified immunity standard so that someone could more easily file a lawsuit if a police officer had, beaten up or violated someone's civil rights or broken the law in interacting with a civilian, and create a greater ability for all of us to file a lawsuit against police officers. So I think that's really key to build accountability, because if a police officer knows that he or she, or their town or city could incur significant financial penalties by not following the law, I think that's a big accountability measure. And so, not to go too much into it, but basically it sets the standard that if a reasonable jury would believe that the behavior of a police officer would not be a reasonable use of force, then qualified immunity would not apply. So in other words, the protection for that police officer would not follow, and therefore a lawsuit could be more likely successful. The House, passed a provision that said that only if a police officer is decertified as an officer, only then can he or she have a lawsuit where qualified immunity is reduced. And so, I do think that that's not as strong as it should be. I think that, the decertification process will already be long enough, and that's going to delay potential justice by someone who's been hurt or impacted by a police officer. So I do hope the Senate language prevails. And I know groups like the ACLU and the NAACP have been, very active in support of the Senate provision. Each bill is, well over 100 pages. So that, that's a bit of a summary. Just an example of where, I see law enforcement crossing over to prisons, and this was a amendment that I filed that did pass in the Senate bill, is a provision that if a police officer is decertified by the state, that he or she cannot become a correction officer, because the last thing we want to see is a disgraced police officer just, going down the street and suddenly working at a state prison or a county prison. So that provision is in the Senate bill. So that's where there are some differences between the House and Senate, and hopefully the stronger provisions of each bill can be in the final conference committee report.
Yeah, I thank you for clarifying the differences here. I do want to thank you as well for that provision about the police not being, disqualified from being COs at prisons. That will impact a lot of people, and that is you've been known for going to help prisoners, at least in Middlesex district, and visiting, and you've been really leading the charge on this sort of accountability in prisons, and that means a lot to a lot of people that I work with and speak with. So I want to thank you for that. I also wanted to bring up the remember I know I had you on the Young Jerks a few years ago. We talked about
yes.
We talked about asset forfeiture. Whatever happened with that?
Well,
Not to segue too long. Whatever happened to that? Remember that?
Yep. And actually, I had initially proposed that as an amendment to the bill, but it just was seen as sort of going a little too far away from sort of strict police abuses, if you will. Yep. So it did not pass in the Senate bill. Yep.
The fight goes on.
I know. But it's the Judiciary Committee is still looking at the bill. I do think you're seeing the impact of more progressive prosecutors like Rachel Rollins, like Andrea Harrington, having an impact on these discussions. And I just think this is an area where there needs to be more advocacy on this kind of bill, and seeing the impact that it has on so many individuals that are innocent, but their property is taken away or can never be returned.
Right.
And Jamie, you brought up advocacy, and something that I talk a lot about is how we are being out organized on almost every issue, but particularly the police reform bill. And there was a report in the Herald a few weeks ago stating that for every one call a legislator receives in favor of police reform, they are receiving 5 calls against it. And you see a lot of ads being taken out, especially in the Boston Herald by police unions and allies, telling people, call your legislator, vote no on this police reform garbage. And now, while I think that the measures in it are nowhere close to adequate, I would absolutely rather have them than not have them. And so I have been calling my representatives to ask them to support this bill. And so I'm just curious, what are you hearing from your constituents? Are you hearing a lot of people asking you to promote to pass this bill, or are you hearing people who Blue Lives Matter, we don't want any of this reform stuff? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that on a positive side, and this was in reaction to a lot of us calling on progressive groups to call their legislators, because I think the dynamic which I know you guys get is that on any bill it's often the opponents, those who are angry or upset or opposed to a bill, that are more vocal than those who are for it. And I think that happened in the beginning, where police officers, police chiefs, police unions, and more often than not, more conservative voters were very vocal. But I actually think that the support has been an outpouring of support really, in August and in September. So I think that legislators feel supported, but I think what's interesting is that there were legislators that were very much closely aligned with police officers or police unions who voted for the police reform bill. And the police unions, many police officers have been just absolutely over the top in their opposition.
Yeah.
My favorite example is, I won't name the district, but a police union endorsed a progressive challenger to an incumbent because the incumbent had voted for the police reform bill, even though I know that the challenger would have been in support of even stronger police reform. So it just, I was fascinated by that decision by that police union. But I think that, that is what's been difficult for a number of legislators, is that they have these ties to police officers, and suddenly the police officers, have been, quite vocal in their disapproval. And unfortunately, it's very frustrating, but even a vocal minority in the legislature somehow has a greater impact, even though a majority, support these things, not to mention that the public, I think, strongly supports these reforms. So I don't know if I totally answered your question, but I think that's the dynamic. But I do think that legislators are feeling supported now. And quite honestly, a lot of us, we want to take this vote, now and get this done and get this, these reforms implemented, instead of it being, hung out there. And, once in a while there will be, a Blue Lives Matter or a Back to Blue rally, including in, the sort of Acton, Westford, Concord area.
Oh, yeah. Been a couple.
Yep.
And so you brought up, and thank you for clarifying that. That did answer my question. And I have a larger question, but I'd like to save those for the end, because something, and again, we've already discussed it, is many people's frustration of what appears to be a majority of legislators are co-signing the bill, are saying that they would support it. I guess a quick question, a quick clarification. For the police reform bill, in terms of how it initially passed both the Senate and the House, did those pass by razor-thin margins, or was there pretty substantial support?
Mm-hmm. They did. Yeah, they passed. They of course passed both the House and Senate, but very close to the 2/3 majority to override the governor's veto. And I would say that there was stronger support in the Senate. I think the House, there was some surprise that a number of state representatives that were perceived as being very progressive, but really felt because of their districts they had to vote no. And so I would say definitely that is having an impact on the House side with with the level of support of the bill and a fear of what will happen when the bill is finalized and what would the governor do to it, because although I have generally found the governor to be very supportive of police reform, given that he is Republican, given that he has the backing of a lot of the correction officer unions or police officer unions, will he feel pressured to veto it or send it back with language? And that's very frustrating, and that's where the advocacy for to every single legislator is so critical to make sure we get that 2/3 to override the governor's veto if need be.
I actually have a point to add about that, about the correctional officers union. Since you brought that up, I was at a rally to change the mascot of the Massachusetts the flag at a Indigenous Peoples rally, and the Blue Lives Matter people showed up along with the landlords. It was a very strange day that were protesting the eviction moratorium. It was a very strange day, and actually the head of the correctional officers union had asked his. I spoke with somebody who was there because his union leader had asked him to go support this. And he showed up to this rally, took a paid day off, and showed up and realized that he was at a Trump rally. That was disrupting Indigenous people that were trying to have their own rally there, and it was violent. It was it was ridiculous. And so I mean, there's certainly, when you bring up that, maybe Governor Baker does want to push these things, but there are people in power in these correctional officers, police unions, that are actually sending out their people to protest or to, call, to write. And then they don't actually, when they show up, they like, he was embarrassed. He's like, I didn't show up for a Trump rally. Somebody showed up to have me protest this bill because, it was a qualified immunity one. It was S-2800 or I forget the number exactly. It was, it was back in July. And he was like, I feel bamboozled by my union leader to be here. But he's, they were having them all call the governor, call their representative, and it feels, even some of the, I guess, the rank and file of these unions have felt bamboozled by that. So I don't know whether Governor Baker realizes that or whether Marty Walsh realizes that when this is going on. I would hope he would. He never listens to me when I try to call or go to his house, but it's something that we've been seeing, throughout the summer, and I would hope that enough people would be calling that would kind of I guess buffer that impact of that. It was pretty alarming. He's like, I didn't even want to be showing up for this. So,
and I think that talking about the governor, I mean, I'd be the first to acknowledge in some areas he's a moderate, even though those aren't my views, but really one area where he really has been just very conservative, and Lauren, I know that you follow this very closely, is criminal justice reform. Is right. That is within days of the criminal justice reform being signed by the governor in 2018, he had filed a bill to change that. There's a dangerousness hearing bill that's still in my committee that the EOP Secretary Turco has been lobbying for. So I'm hoping that his rigidity on being against prison reform or criminal justice reform doesn't extend to police reform, and so far I would say it hasn't. But I am concerned because of the connections between a lot of those entities or professions.
Yeah, it's some sort of like, they get their numbers to, I guess, try to sway people, whereas, the left doesn't, or I don't know, have maybe not as many of us call. I don't know. They scare me, man. I see them all the time. So that's what I'm trying to say. But I would hope that will be passed as well, that dangerous. I mean, we got to get people out of those death traps. But I'm sure Evan has a question.
Of course. So we've been talking a lot about the governor. and maybe this seems to be the theme of the interview, but something that a lot of us get frustrated at is that we have the Democratic Party here in Massachusetts, two supermajorities in both houses. I think in the Senate, it's a 36-4 split. I mean, the Massachusetts Democratic Party can basically do whatever it wants, and it feels on the outside that what the State House normally does is it waits and waits, delays and delays, and then waits to see, well, what will Charlie Baker do? And then will that be sufficient? Will this calm down any noise or cries?
Right.
And you can maybe even argue that is what is occurring with the police reform bill. Let's see what happens in Boston. Let's see how Marty Walsh negotiates with the unions, and then we'll make our response. And so a big question that a lot of people have once they start getting into local politics in Massachusetts is, what is the Massachusetts Democratic Party doing where you have two supermajorities? It doesn't matter what Charlie Baker does, you can overrule or veto. And this is a very large question, and you can take it any way you want. But what is the platform? What is the vision for Massachusetts that the Massachusetts Democratic Party has? Because they could do whatever they want, and it appears like they're doing nothing.
So the focus on the Democratic Party. I mean, I think that, and I serve as a state committee member, is that, first of all, it's important to remember that, at the end of the day, the Mass Democratic Party, by its mission is to elect more Democrats. And although we do have a very progressive platform, there's no requirement that Democratic candidates follow or agree with the platform. And so therefore, one of the discussions that I often have with progressives is just electing more Democrats doesn't necessarily mean that you'll create more democratic or progressive policy, because, a number of Democrats who are elected are more conservative, and in some cases could be, considered Republicans in other states. And so, what control does the party have on that? There has been a big push to say, well, a Democratic candidate, in order to be supported by the party, should have to agree with or follow or vote for X% of the party platform, say 70%. Unfortunately, the committee that was working on that, their proposal was just 50% of the platform. And so that basically means that, virtually anyone who's a Democratic candidate, is going to get the support of the party. So that's where I do disagree with the party's approach. In defense of the Mass Democratic Party, I think that, most legislators, most Democratic elected officials, we have our campaign fundraising base, we have our volunteer base separately for the party. And so I do think a lot of Democratic elected officials say, well, what is the party really doing for me? And that's where, I do think the party needs to be more robust in reaching out to, younger people, to more communities of color, and really diversifying the base. And then, using that base to sort of highlight what the party platform is, and what we expect of Beacon Hill or other Democratic elected officials. So I do wish the party, did more. I don't think they have a lot of, power now. But I think it's more, pressing Democratic elected officials, what are you doing on these issues? And, I'm certainly seeing a lot of pressure around the eviction moratorium, because, suddenly that's affecting families. And I hope that pressure, creates some change on Beacon Hill.
Yeah, me too. I'm very concerned for what's going to happen this week when these notices to quit go out with this housing court. I want to get to UBI so bad, but I know you're also in the Judiciary Committee, and you have sit in on housing court stuff. Have you seen what's happened today?
I have not. I do participate in the trial court eviction stakeholder sort of advisory committee. So this is Chief Justice Carey. Previously, it was Chief Justice Gantz, who tragically passed away a few weeks ago, and was just an amazing advocate for social justice. So, they are, or the governor is, they're recalling or hiring more retired judges to process, all these notices to quit or eviction summons. very, very concerning. And, I know it's difficult for these families or individuals, but there's got to be a way to tell those stories to legislators, because I think, until we're hearing those stories, I think a lot of legislators, are not going to feel pressured or motivated to act.
Absolutely. I guess there's a lot of folks on the ground and organizations working on that we've been working with. City Light Theater Urbana, Homes for All. You've been doing that, working with groups as well. I am afraid that we just have too much to do and too little time, personally. But hopefully, just everybody just stays put and fights those notices to quit, and that something will be done.
Absolutely. And we can't
scary.
just, it is, and we can't just pin all our hopes on, the presidency changing or,
Right.
taking back the Senate. We're Massachusetts, and, often my colleagues are criticizing that nothing gets done by the federal government. And yet right now, we're pinning our hopes on the federal government and hopefully another stimulus when, we could take action right now.
Right. Yeah, we should be the example for the rest of the country.
Well, now that we're talking about stimulus,
Yeah.
I'm looking at your House bill here, 1632, about an act relative to universal basic income.
That's right.
And I know the particulars, but for fun, when will you be mailing me my $1,200 check?
Well, it's even better. It's $1,000 a month. So just send me your address.
And am I correct that this is just a pilot program?
It is a pilot program, so it would be 3 communities, 100 households in each community would get $1,000 per month for 3 years, and then would be a study. Now, when I filed this bill, January 2019, it was seen. I wouldn't call it radical, but it was seen as sort of like, oh wow, this is a really interesting approach.
Yeah.
Now, in the past 2 years, whether because of Andrew Yang running for president or, just the movement growing. And, Lauren was with you at the guaranteed minimum income rally in Boston. I think the movement is really, really taken off.
Yeah.
There's a pilot in Chelsea that I guess is starting this week. So that's really growing. And so my pilot is fairly modest. And, I would love to see this, scaled up for the state or for the nation, but it's really exciting. And I actually interviewed a young mother this morning with 2 kids who, has a job working for a nonprofit. She receives a housing voucher, and, just talking about the choices she has to make in order to pay the rent and pay her expenses. And even just having, for her, she said, even just $400 more a month would make her much more economically secure. So, if everyone got that, imagine the impact that would have, not to mention the impact on the economy as a whole.
And something that I know we saw through the last 6 to 9 months during COVID was one of the largest reductions in poverty across the country was reduced. The greatest reduction of poverty in that time frame was a direct result because of the stimulus, because of the extra $600, I believe, additional to unemployment. And so I have absolutely no doubt that the outcome, and I very hope this bill passes, that the outcome of this study, as well as the one in Chelsea, is this is a monumental game changer to the families that get it. That this will have health ramifications for them and their children, will increase their livelihoods for honestly decades to come, even if it is just for a few years. And so I'm all behind that. I was very critical of
you were.
Of Andrew Yang's proposal, mostly because one, it needed to be deficit neutral, which is for the people out there, just simply means that either it will be paid for by an increase in taxes or a cut in services. And when I normally hear that second part, I get a little bit nervous. And a lot of people kind of saw this as like a bank shot of here's how we can make cuts to Social Security, here's how we can start making cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, let's give them some money up front, cut the services, and then we can always just roll back that stipend. So people like me got a little nervous. It seems that even at the federal level, they've changed their thinking on this, and by that I just mean like Andrew Yang and some people. My question for you is that the federal government, they obviously have a lot more economic tools that we don't have here in Massachusetts. We don't have the money machine. We can't use any sort of MMT theory to finance this. So my question for you is, let's say you studied successful. They want you to write a bill making this across the entire Commonwealth. How do you envision paying for it, and what will that look like? What would your plan for Massachusetts be? And of course, I know this is years out in the future.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'd be the first to say that, certainly it in terms of stimulus spending or just the ability to perhaps raise more money, the federal government is better able to do that. But you're seeing models of UBI in European countries, some of the Scandinavian countries that has a population basically the same as Massachusetts. So is it a tax on the wealthy? I always look at some of the corporate tax breaks that we give out that benefit a select few, and then using that revenue to dedicate to UBI. So it's certainly complicated, and I certainly don't support cutting benefits. And the young woman I interviewed this morning, I mean, she's saying she's getting all these benefits. So certainly she's saying on top of that, if I had this $400 a month, then I'd be more secure. So I want to be clear on that. But no, I think that we have one of the richest states in the country. There are ways to raise taxes on the wealthy. There are companies like Amazon that are doing extremely well during the pandemic. So there's ways to fund this and provide more economic security for all people across the state.
So tax the rich.
That normally seems
Yep, I can see that.
That normally always seems to be the my ending point.
Yeah, I know. All right, so let's go into that a little more, actually, because I was very, I really was moved by a lot of the speakers. I also wrote off UBI. I mean, I actually, having been involved with the Pirate Party, this was an idea people had put forward before. But, Andrew Yang, when it was somebody running for office, I guess a lot of people discredited it or kind of wrote it off, my co-host included. But what do you see as do you see this as a viable thing to work towards in Massachusetts? I'm very excited for the Chelsea pilot, and do you see this, like, what do you see as once again the timeline for this actually becoming something that the Democrats or the left or whatever we are embraces and takes on as a cause?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is going to take, quite honestly, at least a couple of years of organizing. Obviously, we need someone different, in the the governor's office. But I think that support is growing, and maybe it starts with just targeting it to economically vulnerable families. Now, that's obviously not pure UBI or guaranteed minimum income, but is that how we show, the difference that it can make in people's lives? And then once it becomes universal, showing the support it has from the public. So I think it's too early, but I think that this pilot in Chelsea is great. I've written about it a little bit, much more, I think, modest, but I did work in my district with a Boston-based foundation that helped a church in Hudson of mostly Brazilian immigrants, and every member of that church got $500 back in June. And it obviously is not the same as something per month, but for them it really meant a lot to many of the immigrants. Most of them were not eligible for either unemployment or the stimulus because of their legal status. Getting something from a foundation. So, and it was just very, very popular. So I think that again, when I did the interview this morning, one of the things that came up, which I didn't even ask about from this young mother, is just how she feels treated by the different hoops and barriers she has to go through to receive public assistance, and how different that is from the concept of just getting a check in the mail. And it is a much more dignified approach to providing financial support to vulnerable families.
Right, and that is actually a huge community in Acton, Boxborough, and your district. You know,
Mhm.
a large Brazilian immigrant, American immigrant population. And it's awesome that you did that study. I want to know, when they do these studies, like even in Chelsea right now, like what are the metrics? What are they studying? Are they like making everybody keep track of what they spend it on, or are they like, what is the study testing when they call it a pilot study?
Yeah, I wish I knew. I mean, I've certainly followed what the Stockton, California, mayor has done, and I know that they tracked, where that money was going, and it was going, for food, it was going for rent, so
Right.
it was going for, the expenses that we all have, and nothing, quote unquote, outlandish.
Right.
But yeah, I'd be interested to see what the metrics are.
Yeah, and then also one of my concerns also as Renters Radio and as a housing activist is that how, let's say tomorrow we pass UBI for everybody and we all have an extra $1,000 a month to spend. What happens when all that like, how do we stop that from going into our landlord's pockets? Like, what do we have to do first?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, if I mean, certainly at this moment, if people are behind on rent, I guess it's not too much of a concern for me, but I sort of, I guess the bigger picture, which we started talking about at the beginning, is just how are we building more affordable housing? How are we preventing landlords from raising rent, and just the system that just perpetuates landowners, especially large landowners, from just becoming more and more wealthy, and more working families paying more and more of their income just for rent.
Right. So would you be,
Mm-hmm.
I know that before COVID, Mike Connolly as well as others were working on lifting the ban on rent control. You were behind that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I support that. I'm trying to think if it got out of committee or not. I can't quite remember.
I think COVID
the housing
happened.
committee.
No, it ended up
Right.
being voted on. There was a floor vote, and it got destroyed. And like I think 90% of the House anyway went the other way. So it did end up getting a vote, and even representatives from like very poor neighborhoods. My state rep, for example, voted no against it. So
Dan Cena voted for. Well, I don't know if he was elected yet at that point. I gotta have him on sometime. He's voted the right way.
and
Yeah, I've been a strong mentor to him, so I think he's doing a great job. Yep.
Yeah.
Jamie, I have a quick question for you. It seems like the House of Representatives gets a lot more press, gets a lot more attention than the Senate. And I know they have a number differential, but then again, you could argue on the federal level, everyone knows how powerful the U.S. Senate is and what it can do. Do you have any speculation? Why is it that we all focus so much more on the House side of things and not the Senate?
Yeah, well, I think the Senate gets a lot of coverage as well, and we took the first stab at the police reform bill, but I do think that the House still tends to be a little more centralized, and so therefore Speaker DeLeo perhaps just feels more comfortable to speak as the voice of the House versus the Senate, which tends to be more decentralized. So I don't know if it's that. I think that sometimes the media, I think wrongly, assumes that more of the power is in the House because if you look at the joint committees, because there's more state reps and state senators, every joint committee has more state reps, and that can influence whether a bill gets out of committee or not. So I don't exactly know, but no, I am grateful for Senate President Spilka and her focus on empowering the members and focusing on bills that we're championing, and maybe the effect of that is perhaps the media doesn't cover the Senate as well. So
yeah, maybe it's just more chill without DeLeo there. We can all just blame DeLeo.
Right.
That's what I usually do. So We don't have too much time left. I do want to, get into a little bit of the, one of the things that I have always loved about you is the fact that you go to prison. Like not go to prison, but you go visit prisons, and you've been advocating for the rights of people who are incarcerated for many, many years before it was cool. Let's call it that. So, I mean, what's the most recent updates on what's going on there? I know that you were working on advocating for the no-cost calls.
Yes, we had another. It's been I don't know if it'll change because of the weather, but it was a series of very powerful rallies. First, the universal basic income, and then I think the next weekend it was the no cost calls rally, which I spoke at, and then there was a driver's license rally.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, the no cost calls bill, and that was something that the Senate was poised to take up before the end of July, and then very frustratingly, many sheriffs called and made the argument that they received, revenue from those calls from the private companies that processed the calls, and that money went to programming, and therefore they opposed it. And I was just, very disappointed about that. Look, if the state needs to better fund programs as it should, then let's have that conversation. But the idea that, calls from loved ones to,
right.
Family members would be bearing the burden of that to fund, programming or allegedly fund programming. I thought that
there hasn't really been programming since COVID, right? Let's be honest.
No, and I think there's, I certainly, when I go to Susan Baranowski or MCI Shirley, I think the programming is already quite limited and underwhelming. So I think it's an exaggeration to say there's robust programming in any state prison or county jail. So we're, there is a push for the Senate to still pass it. That's a bill, in my opinion, that could pass after the election, when we're coming back to vote on conference committee bills. So, that's what I'm hopeful. I don't know about its chances on the House side, but the organizing on that has been very powerful. And that's a bill that, again, is another example of how much more we have to do on criminal justice reform to create a truly just system.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Families for Justice is Healing. There's a lot of good groups working on that. I've been following and trying to go to those. And then, in terms of the, what's the situation like? I know that you've got, MCI Shirley, Concord, and Susan Baranowski in your district. What is the situation now like with COVID? I know there was quite an extreme lockdown for a while, and it may have been lifted more recently, but there's probably another spike. Like, what have you been seeing, or what have you been hearing about the state of people in there and getting them out, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, this is an example where early on, we did press the governor to, whether it's invoking medical parole, whether it's the parole board, whether it's, being more creative to say, this group of prisoners that have committed, nonviolent crimes or low level crimes, can't they, get a monitor, an ankle monitor, and just, be at home or go to a different facility where they wouldn't have such exposure to COVID. And the governor, rejected, all of that, and actually has been quite opposed to medical parole on people that are terminally ill, not even related to COVID. So, right now my sense is, and I haven't got an update today, but my sense is that, COVID has mostly been decreasing in most of the state prisons, but I know there's been some where there has been a hot spot, and, I don't think the governor is going to change his view. So, for me, it's making sure there's enough PPE and soap and disinfectant and sanitizer in our prisons. I do think it's important for visits to come back, for volunteers to come back, and just I think as we've seen, if you wear a mask and you're careful, then you're not going to see a spread of COVID. And I just I did try to go to Susan Baranowski a few weeks ago to attend a hearing, and unfortunately I was denied, but we are going to plan to go into the prisons and just talk to inmates and correction officers. Do that. I would say probably sometime in November.
Okay, I'll definitely want to follow that. I feel like you have been trying a lot of this, and it's been like blocked in kind of ridiculous ways by sheriff's departments. It seemed a little heinous. I mean, what can people do to help you with that?
Well, I really think until we change the governor, the culture is not going to change. I think that there are well-meaning DOC EOPS officials that are trying to create positive change, but whether it's leadership of correction officers, whether it's some management of DOC, or whether it's the governor, they're just not supporting any real change. So
yeah, well, thank you for continuing the fight on that, even though it's even since the criminal justice reform bill, not everything has actually gone according to law with regards to that. That's been extremely frustrating. So hopefully somebody will run. Or I'll just have to go back to Charlie Baker's lawn again. Hang out with the Stadies.
Thank you for doing that.
You're invited, Evan. You got to come next time.
I will. If it doesn't conflict with any other prior engagements, I'm always all about that. Never been. What is it, Swampscott?
Yeah, it was a very nice walk.
I'm sure.
It's got a nice veranda. Lovely. All right. Do you have any more questions before we sign off, or is there anything else you want to add, Senator Eldridge?
Do you have any plugs that we can help you out with?
Yeah.
Any big appearances you want to increase the attendance?
No, everything's all set. I would just say on the budget front is, I'm certainly expressing my support to raise progressive taxes, whether it's the Hero Coalition bill or closing corporate tax loopholes. And I do think that legislators need to hear more from their constituents on that. And also, what they're seeing people experiencing in their communities around housing, around food insecurity, because, I think until we hear more about that, I'm concerned that there won't be as bold of action in the legislature. So, but thanks so much for having me. It's been a great conversation, and appreciate all your activism in highlighting these efforts and these pieces of legislation.
Yeah, we really appreciate you calling in. Sorry for the delay before, but then there was even more to talk about, so it worked out, and we would love to have you back again. I am extremely proud to be from Acton-Boxborough, when it comes to the people representing my parents' home, parents' town politically at this point. I'm like, oh, well, you know what? Acton's cool. Boxborough's cool. We got Jamie Eldridge. I've run into people that, have a lot of things to say about you, too, like, at protests and stuff, so... keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to plug a few, we're going to let you go and then plug a few resources for people at risk of eviction before we sign off.
But a pleasure speaking to you, Jamie.
Excellent. Good to talk to you both. Have a good rest of the night. Thanks for having me on, okay?
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks again.
What a nice guy.
I know. You thought Acton-Boxborough didn't exist.
I knew where it was. I've been in parts of his district before for some of my disaster relief stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. My big plug for this week is this Wednesday, October 21st, 4 p.m. outside of the bowling building, 2300 Washington Street in Roxbury. There's going to be a very large rally in support of the Boston Teachers Union.
Okay.
Basically, in response to, and this could be updated, so if I'm saying right now is outdated, I apologize, but a deal struck by the city with the Boston Teachers Union in terms of what will be the COVID metrics, which determine faculty being in the buildings, which determine the continuation of the rollout plan. And it looks like the city is going back on the deal they struck with the Boston Teachers Union. So they're actually doing an entire week of action. There's different social media things each day. But the big one I want to highlight again is this Wednesday, 4 p.m. I will be there in support of teachers. So come say hi to me.
Oh, maybe I will.
You're invited too, and everyone else who hears the sound of my voice.
If you hear the sound of my voice, let's go support Boston Teachers Union. We should actually do a show on that at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Everything they're fighting for, that would be good.
I can get some people on for that one.
Yeah, that would be good.
You got any plugs?
Tomorrow, Boston Municipal Court. somebody got arrested yesterday at the Super Happy Fun America Trump Nazi rally.
Yeah, I saw that. 2 people did.
Two people did.
I think one from our side.
Yes, one from our side got arrested, and they will be having a court date tomorrow at 9 a.m. at the Boston Municipal Court. So it's the bowling building. What's the? Maybe you just. I'm trying to find the name of the building. BMC Court.
No, yeah, the bowling building. That's where the BPS headquarters is. So it wouldn't be
no,
there.
I'm talking about New Charles.
And I also want to give a shout out to Heidi, who is our #1 fan in the chat.
Heidi, yeah, that's yeah. Shout out to Heidi. Heidi's been watching it all very closely.
We appreciate your comments.
We do.
I've been tracking them. They've been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, Heidi's been awesome. Commenting on everything. I love it. Really good input. I apologize if I didn't get to all their questions. So we have, there's a court date tomorrow. I'm like, I literally had it up here, and now I feel like at the BMC Municipal Court to support a comrade who was arrested at counter-protesting this rally. Show up, support, make a stand. Hopefully the charges are dropped and everybody's cool.
And everyone, give a lot of love to the men and women behind the scenes who are making all the early voting and voting in in Boston and Massachusetts possible. Just have your thoughts and prayers with those hardworking people.
Yeah,
especially some people that we know.
Especially our now famous, fearless producer Herb Morsiglio, who has some extremely huge muscles from installing all of those early voting drop-off boxes all around the city.
He asked to borrow some of my shirtless tees the other day.
Yeah. You're going to have to start just, you and Evan can just...
He's going to start doing the wrap-up music.
Yeah, he's like, I'm...
Can I plug something?
Of course.
Plug something.
You guys want to learn about Warhammer lore? Dude, check out Baltimore's Warhammer Guide on YouTube. It's a great channel, and you'll get to learn all about the Chaos Gods. It's awesome.
Oh, praise be to the Chaos Gods, after all.
All right.
And before this gets too ridiculous, we're all very tired. There's gonna be more things to plug. Gonna be housing rallies. If you are at risk of eviction, call City Life Vita Urbana. They can hook you up with a lawyer. If you are served a notice to quit, do not leave. For the love of God, do not leave. Yep. Do not leave. Reach out on the internet. I will be posting more resources soon. There are a lot of resources to help you, and you should not be kicked out of your home during a pandemic.
They also legally can't forcibly evict you until January 1st.
Yes, and if they do, we are willing to come and deliver pizza and maybe, bring a sousaphone, a marching band. We'll make it fun. So if the people will be here to help you. This is something that I'm extremely stressed about, and I want to stress that all of the energy that is going into this counter protesting, which is important, I don't want it to have to be going into eviction blockades. But if it has to, we'll be there.
There was actually a training earlier today about that, but
we were doing a show.
So
tune into that training. Can you plug it? Is it archived?
If they post it afterwards, I'm not sure if this group will post it, but if they do post it, I will share it on my social media. But thank you all for watching.
You don't need training
live,
to block an eviction.
Later.
You just need to show up.
I mean, we'll train you there. There are things. There are things that you both should and should not do.
Okay. No ritual sacrifice?
Yeah, none of that.
Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But all right, everyone.
All right, we're signing off. Donate to our Patreon. Patreon.com/rentersradio. Like and subscribe on all the social media to Renters Radio. I am Lauren Pespiza. I am Splendid Spoon as myself on all other social media.
There you go. Evan George, Bostopia News. I'll be Twitch streaming tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Every Tuesday, 9 p.m. That's my time.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Bye,
Bye y'all.